Have you ever felt rejected by the one person you loved most in the world? The one person who you thought would always stand by you? For Amelia, that moment came in the most painful way possible. Her own son asked her not to attend his wedding. What could have possibly driven him to humiliate her like that? And why did it feel like her entire life was unraveling in that one instant? Stay tuned as we dive deep into a mother's heartache and the journey to reclaim her strength. Don't forget to subscribe and let me know where you're watching from in the comments. I never expected this, not in a million years. I always thought that no matter what happened in my life, my son Jack would always be there for me. I raised him with love, with care, with everything I had. He was my pride, my joy. But when he called me that morning, asking me to stay away from his wedding, it shattered me. It was as if everything I had built up in my heart came crashing down in a single, cruel moment. "Mom, I need you to stay away from the wedding," Jack said. His voice was so cold, so detached. It felt like a slap in the face. My mind couldn't process what I was hearing. I asked him, "Why, Jack? What's going on?" But he was insistent, his words sharp and rehearsed. "It's better this way. It'll be too embarrassing for everyone, for Camille, for her family, for the guests." His words stung like 1,000 knives, each one deeper than the last. My chest tightened, and I could barely breathe. How could he do this to me? I thought back to all the years I spent making sacrifices for him, supporting him through every challenge. When he was a child, I put my own dreams aside to make sure he had the best. And now, after everything, he was telling me that I wasn't welcome at his wedding, not even for him. I tried to reason with him, tried to ask why, but all I got in return was silence and indifference. My own son, the one I had raised and loved unconditionally, had pushed me aside for reasons I didn't understand. I hung up the phone, my hands shaking. My thoughts were swirling, but all I could focus on was the suffocating weight of rejection. I felt invisible, unimportant. It was as though everything I had ever been to him, the nurturing mother, the supportive figure, had meant nothing. I didn't matter. And in a way, I wasn't surprised. Jack had always been distant in recent years, ever since he started dating Camille, the woman he was now marrying. She was everything I was not, beautiful, successful, and from a wealthy family. And now I realized, Jack wanted nothing to do with the mother who had raised him in a modest home, with love but little else. The tears that had threatened to fall since that morning finally spilled over, soaking my cheeks. I felt alone, more alone than I had ever felt in my entire life. I walked through the house, each step echoing in the empty space. George, my husband, was sitting in the living room, reading the newspaper. When I told him what Jack had said, his reaction was underwhelming. "It's just a wedding, Amelia. Don't make a big deal out of it," he muttered, barely looking up from the paper. His indifference only added to the pain. It felt like he didn't care. It felt like he never really cared about me. Maybe he never had. I sat down beside him, staring at the wall, trying to make sense of everything. The rejection from Jack, the indifference from George. It was all too much. I had spent so many years giving everything to my family, to them, and yet here I was, discarded, forgotten. Jack had chosen Camille and her world over me, and George, well, George was always too absorbed in his own world to notice the cracks in ours. I felt a wave of anger, mixed with sadness. My heart ached for the son who didn't want me in his life, and for the husband who had never truly been there for me. I tried to gather myself, to regain some semblance of control, but the truth was, I couldn't. I was drowning in the pain of it all. How could I just move on from this? How could I face Jack again after the way he treated me? How could I look at George without seeing all the years of emotional neglect? The weight of it all was too much to carry alone. I was about to leave the room, to escape the oppressive silence of the house, when my phone rang again. It was Jack. This time, his voice was shaky, panicked, as if he'd been crying. "Mom," he said. His words rushed. "I don't know what to do. She didn't show up. Camille didn't show up at the wedding." I froze. My heart skipped a beat. What was happening? Why would Camille leave him at the altar? It didn't make sense. Hadn't everything been perfect? Was this the culmination of everything I had feared, everything I had been pushed aside for? "Jack, what do you mean? Why didn't she come?" I asked, my voice trembling with concern, but also with an unexpected feeling of relief, As much as I had been hurt, part of me couldn't help but wonder if Jack was finally feeling the weight of what he had done. "I don't know," Jack replied, his voice breaking. "She left. She's gone. She said it was all too much, that she couldn't go through with it. Mom, she left me." I didn't know what to say. A part of me felt for him. I wanted to console him, to tell him that it would be okay, that I would always be there. But another part of me, the part that had been hurt so deeply, felt a strange sense of vindication. Jack had rejected me, cast me aside, and now the life he had built on lies and appearances was falling apart. The perfect world he had tried to create was crumbling. For a long moment, there was silence on the other end of the phone. I didn't know what to say. What could I say? My son was suffering, but he had caused so much pain for me. I didn't know where to go from here. As I sat there, the phone still pressed to my ear, I realized that the wedding wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. Jack needed me now, in a way that he never had before. But could I really be there for him? After everything he'd done? My heart was heavy with uncertainty, but one thing was clear. I had to find out the truth. What had happened to Camille? And more importantly, what was happening to Jack? Was this the moment he would finally face the reality of his choices? The call with Jack left me emotionally drained. But what truly shattered me in those hours afterward wasn't just the pain of his rejection. It was the suffocating silence in our house. George, my husband, the man who I had spent nearly 40 years of my life with, remained as distant as ever. His usual indifference stung even more now. I wanted to scream at him, to make him feel my pain, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I had grown so used to his emotional absence over the years that I didn't know how to bridge the gap between us anymore. I sat across from him at the dinner table. The sound of our utensils clinking against our plates felt louder than it should have. I was desperate for something, anything, that could help me make sense of everything. My mind kept going back to Jack's words. "It'll be too embarrassing for everyone." But instead of comforting me, George barely seemed to notice my hurt. He didn't ask how I was feeling, didn't even acknowledge that I'd just been rejected by our son. After dinner, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to confront him. "George," I began, my voice shaking, "what happened to us?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. George, as expected, didn't meet my eyes right away. He didn't even seem to hear me, lost in his own world. But I wasn't going to let it go. Not this time. He sighed, leaning back in his chair, looking at the ceiling as if the answer to my question was written there. "You're not the only one hurting, Amelia," he finally said, his tone as cold as ever. "You think I haven't noticed how things have been between us?" I could feel my chest tightening. "What do you mean by that?" I asked, desperate to understand. "You've always been so wrapped up in Jack and his needs, and I've been alone, Amelia. All these years, I've been alone," he said, his voice quieter now, as if revealing something he'd never said before. For a moment, I just stared at him. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Had it really been like that all these years? Was I the one who had failed him too? "Is that it?" I asked, almost incredulous. "You've been alone? Is that why you've never been there for me? Never supported me?" George ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. "It's not that simple," he muttered, almost to himself. "I made a mistake, Amelia. A big one, and I've carried it all this time." I froze. A mistake? My mind raced, trying to figure out what he meant. Could it be what I thought? "What do you mean by a mistake?" I demanded, the words slipping out before I could stop them. George didn't answer right away. He sat there for a long moment, his eyes searching mine, as if looking for a way to explain himself, without fully acknowledging the depth of what he was about to say. Finally he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I cheated on you, Amelia. With someone, a long time ago." His words hit me like a hammer. I felt the ground beneath me shift, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. "It was when you were struggling after Jack was born. You were so focused on him, and I—" He stopped, unable to finish his sentence. I couldn't hold back the tears. I hadn't seen this coming. All those years, all that I had given him, and this was what I had been blind to? He'd been distant for so long, but I had never imagined this. My heart shattered as I tried to process the betrayal. "You're telling me you cheated on me all those years ago?" I asked, my voice breaking. "And you never thought to tell me? To be honest with me?" George didn't look at me. His gaze fell to the floor, the weight of his confession pressing on both of us. I didn't think I could. You were so fragile back then, Amelia. I thought it would destroy you, and I thought I could live with the guilt." He paused, as if searching for some kind of justification. "But I was wrong. I've been wrong about a lot of things." My mind was spinning. I felt the walls of our home closing in around me. The lies, the silence, the years of not knowing what had been eating away at him. It all made sense now. And yet, none of it mattered. I wasn't just angry with him. I felt stupid. I had given my life to this man, this marriage. And for what? To be made a fool of? The betrayal I felt from Jack wasn't the only wound I had to contend with anymore. George had also betrayed me. He had been emotionally absent for years, not just physically distant, but emotionally checked out. He had allowed me to carry the weight of our family's issues on my own, while he dealt with his own guilt in secret. His apology meant nothing to me now. "You don't get it, George," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "You think this is just about Jack and Camille, don't you? But it's not. It's about the years we've spent together, the life we've built on lies. I don't even know who you are anymore." He looked up, his eyes soft but full of regret. "I'm sorry, Amelia. I really am." I couldn't look at him anymore. I stood up, pacing across the room, feeling like a stranger in my own home. I had always believed in the power of family, the idea that blood was thicker than water, but now I was questioning everything. My son didn't want me at his wedding. My husband had betrayed me. What did that leave me with? I stopped by the window, staring out at the night sky, my heart heavy. The world outside seemed so distant, so cold. I didn't know where to go from here. I couldn't go back to the way things were. I couldn't pretend that everything was fine. The pain from Jack's rejection, from George's betrayal, was overwhelming. And yet, something inside me stirred, something I hadn't felt in years. A fire, a determination, a need to reclaim my life. I didn't know how, but I would find a way to move on, to heal. For now, though, I needed to let the anger settle. The tears needed to dry, and I needed to face the reality of what had just been revealed. George's confession, Jack's rejection, none of it could be undone. But one thing was clear. My life was mine again. I wasn't going to let them break me. I had no intention of attending the wedding, but something inside me told me that I needed to know more about Camille, the woman Jack had chosen to spend his life with. She had been the cause of so much turmoil in my son's life, and now, with the wedding on the horizon, she seemed like the only piece left to understand. I needed answers, and this would be my only chance. It was at a pre-wedding party that I finally came face to face with Camille. I had heard about the event from a friend of mine, someone who had been invited, but not me. It seemed strange, but I wasn't concerned about the social dynamics. I only cared about understanding who this woman was. I arrived at the venue, a lavish ballroom adorned with flowers and soft lights, and there she was, standing in the center of it all, surrounded by people, smiling, looking every bit the image of perfection. The woman who had apparently been so perfect for Jack. As I approached, I could feel the tension in the air. Camille was the picture of elegance. Her dress was stunning, expensive no doubt, in a way that felt more like a display of wealth than a celebration of love. She caught sight of me as I neared, her eyes momentarily flickering with something I couldn't quite place. But then, like flipping a switch, she flashed me a polite smile. "Amelia, right?" she asked, her voice soft, almost too sweet. "It's so nice to finally meet you." I nodded, barely able to mask my discomfort. The woman before me was the one who had pushed my son to the edge, the one who had rejected me as if I were nothing more than an inconvenience. But I kept my emotions in check. This wasn't about me. Not anymore. "It's nice to meet you too, Camille," I replied, forcing a smile of my own. "I wanted to have a chance to talk to you. If that's all right." Camille's smile widened slightly, but I noticed the tension in her posture. She didn't seem entirely at ease. "Of course, I'm happy to chat. Come on, let's grab a drink." We moved to the side of the room, where a small bar was set up. As she poured us both a glass of champagne, I observed her closely. She was beautiful, no question, but there was something about her that felt off, something I couldn't quite place. Maybe it was the way she carried herself, the way her perfection seemed manufactured, not natural. We took a seat at a nearby table, and the conversation started off light. She spoke about the wedding preparations, about Jack, about the future. But as the words left her lips, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was all rehearsed. She seemed to be saying the right things, but I could sense the underlying unease. "So, "How are you feeling about the wedding?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Her eyes flickered for a brief second before she responded. "I'm excited, of course. It's a big day, for Jack, for me, for everyone." She paused, glancing at me as if weighing her words. "But, you know, it's not always as easy as it looks." I frowned slightly, sensing that there was more to her statement. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice steady but curious. Camille sighed, setting her drink down. Her posture slumped just a little, and for a moment she seemed vulnerable, human. "It's just that, being with Jack, well, it's been complicated," she admitted, her voice lower now. "I love him. I really do. But sometimes I feel like I'm living a life that isn't really mine. There are so many expectations, so many people judging us. I never thought that loving someone would come with so many rules." The vulnerability in her voice caught me off guard. Here I had expected to hear the usual rehearsed lines of a woman who had everything under control. Instead, she was revealing something I hadn't anticipated. There was fear behind her words, an insecurity that she hadn't shown anyone before. "What kind of expectations?" I asked gently, leaning in slightly. She glanced around the room, making sure no one was paying attention to us, before leaning in closer. "It's about who I'm supposed to be, the perfect daughter-in-law, the perfect wife, the perfect everything. But people don't realize the pressure it puts on you. Jack's family, well, they come from money, from a world that I don't belong to. And the truth is, I've always felt like I have to hide where I come from, my roots, my background. It's like it's not good enough for them." I was shocked by her honesty. I had assumed that Camille was just a cold woman trying to take my son from me, but here she was, revealing her own insecurities. She wasn't just someone who had rejected me. She was someone who, in her own way, felt rejected by the world around her. It wasn't just Jack who had tried to bury his past. Camille was doing the same. "I know how you feel," I said before I could stop myself. The words just slipped out. Jack never really understood his roots either. He's ashamed of where he came from, of what we had. Camille's eyes softened. She looked at me differently now, as if she saw something more than the woman who had once been cast aside. "I don't think it's about being ashamed," she said quietly. It's about fitting in, about trying to live up to this image that's been created for us. And it's exhausting." I swallowed hard. Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. I hadn't expected this kind of vulnerability from her. I thought I was the only one who had been affected by Jack's need to hide his origins, but now I understood. Camille wasn't just the villain in this story. She was as much a victim of societal pressure as he was. And for the first time, I realized that I wasn't just angry at her for taking my son. I was angry at the world that had forced them both to carry these heavy burdens. "I don't want to make this harder than it already is," I said, my voice softer now. "But I just need you to understand. Jack doesn't need to hide where he came from. None of us do." She looked at me for a long time, her eyes searching mine. Finally, she nodded. "I understand, and I'm sorry if I've made things difficult for you." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the conversation hanging between us. It wasn't a resolution, not exactly, but it was something. For the first time, I didn't see Camille as the woman who had taken my son away from me. I saw her as someone just as trapped by the world's expectations as I had been. But even with this understanding, I couldn't help but wonder, was this the beginning of something new? Or was it just another part of the game, another layer of deceit? I didn't know. But one thing was clear. I had to be careful. Because like Camille, Jack, and myself, the truth was a fragile thing. And sometimes, once the truth is uncovered, there's no going back. The days following the pre-wedding party seemed to drag on, and I found myself trapped in a sea of reflections. What was happening to Jack? What had caused my son to make such painful decisions, to distance himself from everything that was real, including me? The sting of rejection was still fresh, but something inside me told me there was more to discover. I needed to understand what had driven him to change so drastically, what had led him to hide his roots and push away the life he had always known. It was during a quiet afternoon, when my mind was wandering, that I decided to dig deeper. I needed to understand what was really going on in Jack's life. The superficial conversations no longer gave me answers. I needed to go beyond, to dig through the layers of lies he had built until I could understand why he had distanced himself from all the people who loved him. The house was silent as I sifted through old photo albums, memories from a past that now felt as distant as a dream. I opened one of the albums and stared at pictures of Jack as a child, his first steps, his first birthday, his high school graduation. I could see the joy in his eyes, the innocence, the boy who once looked up at me with admiration. Where had that boy gone? When did he start to wear a mask, pretending to be someone he wasn't? As I flipped through the pages, something caught my eye. It was a picture of Jack and me taken the day he graduated high school. He was standing next to me, but he looked different in that picture. Distant, almost as if he were standing apart from me. It hit me then. All this time, I had thought Jack was simply becoming an adult, gaining independence. But what if he wasn't just growing up? What if he was running away from something? What if he had been hiding something from me all these years? My hands trembled as I continued looking through the photos, and the pieces began to fit together. Jack's behavior over the years, his increasing distance from me, the way he would avoid talking about his childhood, his discomfort when people from our past would visit, had all been signs I had ignored, signs that I had brushed off as him just growing up or wanting privacy. But the truth was, Jack had always been hiding his humble beginnings, ashamed of where he came from. I sat down heavily on the couch, the weight of the realization sinking in. How had I missed this? How could my own son feel so ashamed of his roots, the very things that made him who he was, and what had driven him to such extremes? I remembered the times when I would stay up late, working extra hours to make sure Jack had the best. I sacrificed my own happiness, my own dreams, so that he could attend the best schools, so that he could have opportunities I never had. I poured everything I had into giving him a life that would be better than mine. But in the end, it seemed that none of it was enough. Why had Jack chosen to live a life of lies? Why had he distanced himself from the people who loved him most, from the woman who had given everything for him? It made no sense to me. He had been loved. He had been supported. He had been given everything he needed to succeed. So why was he hiding from that truth? Why was he ashamed of his past, ashamed of his mother, the very person who had fought so hard to give him the life he had now? I couldn't answer those questions. I didn't know why Jack had made these choices, but I knew one thing for certain. He was afraid. He was afraid of being good enough for the world he was trying to fit into. I realized then that Jack's need to prove himself to society, to Camille, was driving him to make decisions that hurt those closest to him. The more I thought about it, the more my resentment grew. How could he not see the sacrifices I had made for him? How could he throw away everything we had, everything we were, just to fit into a mold that wasn't even his own? It was as if all the love and effort I had poured into him had been meaningless in the face of his desire to belong to a world that wasn't his. As the anger started to settle in, I began to hatch a plan, a quiet, calculated plan. If Jack wanted to live in a world of lies, then he would have to face the consequences of his choices. I wasn't going to let him continue down this path without understanding what it would cost him. I had spent my whole life building up my family, my son, and all he had done was tear it down for the sake of appearances. Well, now it was my turn. I would make sure Jack understood the impact of his choices. I would make him face the truth, whether he liked it or not. But for now, I had to wait. The time would come when Jack would finally see that the truth always comes out, and when it did, he would have no one to blame but himself. I wasn't going to make it easy for him. He had rejected me, but he had also rejected the truth, and it was time for him to face that truth head on. The world around me seemed to spin on while I remained frozen, trapped by the pain of betrayal. Jack's rejection still stung, and George's confession had left me reeling. I had always believed that our family was strong, that the love we shared would hold us together. But now, it felt like everything I had known, everything I had worked for, was slipping through my fingers. I began to feel more isolated than I ever had before. The silence in the house was unbearable, and I found myself avoiding George whenever I could. He had apologized, yes, but the wound he had caused was too deep to heal with a few words. His betrayal had shaken me, but it wasn't just his fault. I had allowed myself to live in the shadows, to become so consumed by my roles as a wife and mother that I lost sight of who I was. But now, for the first time in years, I felt a stirring inside of me, a quiet whisper telling me that I needed to reclaim my life, to find a new purpose. It was a terrifying thought to face the possibility of living for myself after so many years of living for others, but it was also a liberating one. I wasn't sure where to begin, but I knew I had to start somewhere. I decided to pick up the things I had once loved, things that had been pushed aside in the chaos of family life. I dusted off my old art supplies and set up an easel by the window. I hadn't painted in years, but as I dipped the brush into the vibrant colors, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. Painting had always been an escape, a way to express the feelings I couldn't put into words. And now, with all the turmoil inside me, I needed it more than ever. The strokes of color on the canvas seemed to release something inside me, a tension I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Each stroke was like a step toward rediscovering the woman I had once been, the woman who had dreams of her own, the woman who had passions beyond her family. As I painted, I allowed myself to remember those early years of my marriage, before everything became about Jack and George, before I buried my own aspirations under the weight of their expectations. I thought back to the days when I had dreamed of traveling the world, of becoming a writer, a creator, but those dreams had felt selfish in the face of the responsibilities of motherhood and marriage. I had convinced myself that my role was to be the foundation, the one who held everything together. But in doing so, I had lost myself. And now, here I was, at a crossroads, trying to figure out how to rediscover my own worth. It wasn't easy. The voice of doubt crept in, whispering that I was too old, that it was too late to chase those dreams now. But I refused to listen. For once, I was doing something for me. I wasn't just painting for therapy, I was painting for my future. I was reawakening a part of myself that I had buried for so long, and I felt a spark of hope for the first time in years. Along with painting, I returned to reading. Books had always been a refuge for me, a way to escape into other worlds. I hadn't realized how much I had missed it until I opened a book and found myself lost in the pages once again. Reading was more than just a hobby. It was a reminder that I still had interests outside of being a wife and a mother. I still had a mind, a heart, a soul. I wasn't just a caretaker. I was a person with thoughts, dreams, and desires. One evening, as I sat with a book in my lap, the reality of it all hit me. I had spent so much of my life living for others that I had forgotten how to live for myself. It wasn't just Jack's rejection that had pushed me to this point. It was the years of putting my needs last. It was the years of self-sacrifice without recognition, of feeling invisible in my own life. But now, for the first time, I could see the woman I had been before, the woman who had hopes, who had passions, who had a future. This was my journey now, my path to rediscovery. It wasn't going to be easy. There were still moments when I felt the sting of betrayal from Jack, from George, but those moments were becoming less frequent. With each brush stroke, each page I turned, I felt a sense of healing, of reclaiming the parts of myself that had been lost. I started to plan a project for myself, a small one at first, something I could pour my heart into, something that would be mine and mine alone. I began to write again, something I hadn't done in years. I didn't know what I would write about, but the act of putting pen to paper felt like a small revolution. My life was no longer defined by the roles I had played for others. I was no longer just a mother, a wife. I was Amelia. I was reclaiming my own identity, my own worth. And as I continued on this path, I began to feel something else. Peace. I didn't need Jack's approval. I didn't need George's validation. I didn't need anyone to tell me that I mattered. I knew now that I mattered to myself. And that was enough. For the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope for the future. I had no idea where this journey would take me, but I knew it was the beginning of something new. I wasn't finished yet. I wasn't done living. The phone call from Jack had left me confused, hurt, and strangely distant. I hadn't expected him to reach out after everything that had happened, but when he did, his voice, broken and shaky, spoke volumes. "Mom," he had said, "I don't know what to do. I'm so lost. I've been so wrong about everything." It was the first time he'd ever admitted to feeling this way. Up until then, Jack had always worn the mask of confidence, the armor of someone who had it all figured out. But this call, this raw admission, made me realize that the son I thought I knew was someone I had yet to understand. He was unraveling, and he didn't know how to stop. The next few weeks were a blur. Jack had started seeing a therapist, something I had suggested after our last heated conversation. I didn't know what kind of breakthrough he expected to have, but it was a step. It was a step I hadn't been able to take with him before. He was seeking help. For the first time, I saw a glimmer of self-awareness in my son that had always been absent. Jack's therapy sessions seemed to open up a floodgate of emotions that had been buried for years. He'd been living a lie for so long, pretending to be someone he wasn't, to fit into a mold that wasn't his. His childhood, his roots, everything he once was, had been hidden away. But now, in the sterile, neutral space of his therapist's office, he was confronting his past. It was messy, it was painful, but it was necessary. He needed to face what he had been running from for so long. A week later, Jack asked to meet with me. He'd been making strides in therapy, but he knew he couldn't truly heal unless he faced me, his mother, the person he had hurt the most. I agreed to meet him, though a part of me feared what might come out of this confrontation. Would it bring healing, or would it only bring more pain? We met at a small cafe, one that was far from our usual haunts. The quiet ambiance and the smell of freshly brewed coffee didn't calm my nerves. I could tell by the way Jack was sitting, hunched over his cup, that he was nervous. His usual air of confidence was gone, replaced by something raw, vulnerability. "Mom," Jack began, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "I don't know where to begin. I've been lying to you, to myself, to everyone." He paused, taking a deep breath. "I've spent my entire life hiding who I am, hiding where I come from, hiding from you." I stayed quiet, letting him speak. I didn't want to interrupt, even though my heart was racing. I wasn't sure if this was an apology or just a confession. "You always gave everything for me, everything for—" "Mom," Jack continued, his eyes not meeting mine. "But I pushed you away. I pushed you away because I was ashamed. Ashamed of our life. Ashamed of where we came from. I thought if I could be someone else, someone better, someone who belonged in the world Camille and her family live in, I could finally be good enough. Good enough for them. Good enough for society." His words hit me like a ton of bricks. Jack had never admitted his shame before. All these years, I had seen his behavior as arrogance, as him trying to prove that he was better than he was. But now, I understood. It wasn't arrogance. It was fear. Fear of not being good enough. Fear of not being able to fit in. And he had built a life based on that fear. "I didn't understand," he continued, his voice breaking slightly. "I didn't understand how much I was hurting you. I thought I could just leave all that behind. The past, the memories of our life. But the truth is, I've been suffocating. Mom, I've been suffocating under the weight of all these lies." I felt a mix of emotions rise in me. There was hurt. Yes, so much hurt. But there was something else. Something I hadn't expected. Understanding. I understood now why Jack had acted the way he had. It wasn't because he didn't love me. It wasn't because he didn't care. It was because he didn't believe in himself. He didn't think he was worthy of the love I had given him. As he spoke, I saw him for what he was. A lost young man, trying to make his way in a world that didn't see him for who he truly was. He had tried so hard to fit in with people who couldn't see the worth in him. And all the while, he had pushed away the people who loved him most. "I'm sorry," Jack whispered, his voice filled with regret. "I've hurt you so much, and I don't know how to fix it. I don't know how to make it right." I reached across the table and placed my hand on his. "Jack, I don't know if you can fix it all," I said, my voice soft but firm. "But I know that the only way to move forward is to be honest. With yourself, with me, with everyone who loves you. You can't keep running from who you are. You have to face it, face the truth." His eyes filled with tears as he nodded. I know that now. I've been so afraid. But I don't want to be that person anymore. I don't want to hide anymore. I want to be real." In that moment, I realized something. My son wasn't the enemy. He wasn't the villain in this story. He was just a young man, struggling with the weight of expectations and the fear of not being enough. And I was his mother. I had always been the one to help him through the tough times. But this time, I realized he needed to help himself. And I needed to help him see that. "Jack, I'm not angry anymore," I said, squeezing his hand. "But you need to stop hiding. You need to accept who you are, where you come from, and the people who love you for who you truly are." He nodded again, his expression one of determination. "I will. I promise. I will stop hiding. As we sat there, the weight of everything began to lift, not because everything was fixed, but because we had taken the first step toward healing. Jack was finally facing the truth, and so was I. It wasn't going to be easy, but I believed that this was the beginning of something new, a new relationship, one built on honesty, not fear. The wedding day arrived with all the anticipation of an event that was meant to heal old wounds. Jack, despite the cracks in his life, had seemed determined to make it work, to put on the face of someone who was finally going to get everything he wanted. The guests had gathered, the venue was prepared, and Camille had even arrived in her dress, looking every bit the image of perfection. But in the moments before the ceremony began, everything collapsed. Camille had disappeared. Jack's phone rang just minutes before the ceremony was supposed to start. His hands trembled as he answered, his face losing all color as he heard her voice on the other end. "I can't do it," Camille had said, the words almost inaudible. "I can't go through with this." She was gone. I could see the devastation in Jack's eyes as he crumpled into a chair. The confident, self-assured man I had come to know had disappeared, leaving behind only a broken young man who seemed to be unraveling at the seams. The tension between us melted away as I approached him. My instincts as a mother kicked in, and I rushed to his side, though the wounds from his past rejection still lingered. I didn't know what to say to him, but I knew he needed me. He needed someone, even if it was only for this moment. Jack looked up at me, tears in his eyes. "She left me, Mom. She just left me." His voice broke as he said the words. "I don't understand. She said she loved me, but now she's gone." I reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. The words I wanted to say caught in my throat. I wasn't sure if I should offer comfort or let him process the enormity of the situation on his own. All I could do was be there, silently holding him, as the world around us seemed to fall apart. In the days that followed, Jack became even more withdrawn, spending most of his time in his apartment, staring at the walls as if waiting for some kind of answer that wouldn't come. I wanted to reach out, to help him process what had happened, but he was closed off in a way that I hadn't seen before. The pain in his eyes was too much to bear, and yet, in a strange way, I also felt something else. Relief. The relief wasn't about Camille leaving. It wasn't even about the wedding falling apart. It was the feeling that perhaps, just perhaps, the truth was starting to emerge. The truth that Jack had been living in a world of lies, hiding behind the facade of perfection that Camille had been a part of. It wasn't just Camille who had run away from this relationship. It was the entire life Jack had been trying to build with her, a life based on false expectations. As I sat in my own home, reflecting on the situation, I felt a mix of emotions. There was sorrow for my son's heartbreak, but also an unsettling sense of understanding. Camille had run from a reality she couldn't face. She was a woman trapped by the same societal pressures that had ensnared Jack. The fear of not being enough, of not fitting in with the world they were supposed to belong to, had consumed them both. Camille had realized, perhaps too late, that she could never be a part of the world Jack had created in his mind. Despite my anger and the resentment I still carried, I couldn't help but feel sorry for her. She, too, had been a victim of expectations. She had been forced to hide her roots, her background, her own truths, in order to fit into the world Jack had convinced himself was his future. I understood now. Camille hadn't run because she didn't love Jack. She had run because she couldn't live in the lie he had created, just as much as Jack couldn't live in the lie he had created for himself. I began to investigate Camille's past, digging into the things Jack had never wanted to talk about. What had driven her to the point of fleeing? I was determined to find out. The more I learned, the more I saw a young woman who had struggled with the same pressures Jack had. Camille, like my son, had come from humble beginnings, but she had been raised in a world that demanded perfection, a world that could never accept the person she truly was. I found an old interview of Camille from before she met Jack. She had talked about her family, her upbringing, and her own struggles with fitting in. The facade she had so carefully built had been constructed to hide the fact that she, too, had always been torn between two worlds. Her family was wealthy, but she had never felt truly comfortable in that world. She had always felt like an outsider, like she wasn't enough. And then, I began to see it more clearly. Camille had come into Jack's life because she, too, was trying to escape her past. She had hoped that marrying Jack would allow her to finally leave behind the life she had grown up in. But instead of finding solace in him, She had found herself drowning in the same expectations that had haunted her throughout her life. It wasn't that she didn't love Jack, it was that she had never truly confronted the truth about herself, and in trying to fit into his world, she had lost herself. In a strange twist of fate, Camille's departure became the catalyst for Jack to finally confront the truth. With her gone, there was no more pretending, no more hiding. He had no choice but to face the lies he had been living. He had no one else to blame but himself. And maybe, just maybe, this was the wake-up call he needed to truly change. I knew that Jack had a long road ahead of him, and I wasn't sure if he would ever fully recover from this heartbreak. But I also knew that this was the first step in him facing the reality of his life, the life he had been running from for so long. The painful truth was out in the open now, and it was time for both of us to confront it. As for Camille, I didn't know where she had gone, or if she would ever return to Jack. But I hoped that, wherever she was finding a way to live honestly, to stop running from herself, because in the end, the truth was the only thing that could set any of us free. The silence in Jack's apartment was suffocating. I could feel it each time I visited, how he sat there, a broken man, lost in his own guilt. The phone call from Camille had shattered him, but it wasn't just her absence that left him in pieces. It was everything that had led to this moment, the lies, the fear, the constant hiding from himself. I sat across from him one evening, watching as he stared blankly out the window. He hadn't spoken much since Camille had left. His usual arrogance, the facade of the successful man, had crumbled. I saw the vulnerability in his eyes, something I hadn't seen in years. It was as if the walls he had built around himself had finally collapsed, exposing a son who was completely lost. "Mom," Jack finally spoke, his voice hoarse, as if the words were forced out of him. "I've made such a mess of everything. I'm not the person I thought I was. I've been lying to myself, to everyone, to you, to Camille, to my whole life." He paused, taking a deep breath, his hands trembling as he ran them through his hair. "I thought if I could just make enough money, get enough status, then maybe I'd finally be good enough. But it was all a lie. Everything I've done, all the decisions I made. I thought I was building a life, but all I built was a house of cards." The admission hit me like a punch to the stomach. Jack had always been proud of his success, of the life he had created. He had worked hard for it, sure, but it was always about appearances. It was never about substance. He had built his life on a foundation of lies, pretending to be someone he wasn't, hiding his roots as if they were something to be ashamed of. And now, with everything crumbling around him, the guilt was consuming him. "Jack," I said gently, "you've been so focused on this image, this life you've tried to create for yourself, that you've lost sight of what really matters. You've lost yourself along the way." He looked at me, the pain in his eyes palpable. "I thought I could leave all of that behind," he whispered. "I thought if I just changed who I was, I could escape it. I could escape the feeling that I'm not good enough. But I was wrong. I don't know who I am anymore. And now, Camille is gone, and I've pushed everyone away." His voice cracked at the mention of Camille. I could see how much he had hoped for her approval, for her acceptance. He had tried so hard to prove he was worthy of her love, but in doing so, he had lost sight of what truly mattered. I could feel the weight of his shame, the self-loathing that dripped from his words. I had seen him this way before, as a child, when he had made mistakes and felt like he was a failure. But this time, it was different. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a lifetime of self-deception. "I'm so sorry, Mom," Jack continued, his voice breaking. "I've wasted so much of my life trying to be someone I'm not, and now I don't even know where to start to fix it. I've hurt you. I've hurt myself. I've hurt everyone who's ever loved me." I reached across the table, placing my hand over his. "Jack, you can't keep running from this. You can't keep hiding from the truth. The truth is, you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to live up to anyone's expectations. Not mine, not Camille's, not society's. You just need to be you, and you need to accept who you are, where you come from." He looked at me, his eyes full of doubt. "But how do I do that? How do I face all of this? I'm so ashamed. I don't know if I can ever make up for everything I've done." "You don't have to make up for everything," I said softly. "You just have to start being honest, start living authentically. You've spent so much of your life running from the truth, hiding from your past, but it's time to face it. It's time to accept who you are and who you were." Jack fell silent, his gaze dropping to the table. I could see the weight of his internal battle, the conflict between wanting to change and feeling trapped in the life he had created. It wasn't going to be easy for him. It wasn't going to be easy for either of us. But I knew that in order for him to heal, he had to face his past. "I don't want to keep living in this lie," Jack said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to pretend anymore. I don't want to be ashamed of who I am. I've been so afraid that I'd never be enough." I could feel the shift in him, the beginning of a change. It wasn't much yet, but it was there. The fear that had held him captive for so long was starting to loosen its grip. He wasn't running anymore. For the first time, Jack was ready to face the truth, even if it meant confronting the parts of himself that he had longed to hide. "Jack," I said, my voice filled with compassion, "you are enough. You've always been enough. But you have to let go of this idea that you need to be someone else. You've spent your whole life trying to fit into a mold that wasn't meant for you. It's time to break free of that. It's time to live for yourself." Jack nodded, though I could see the fear still in his eyes. It was a long road ahead, and the path to healing wouldn't be easy, but I could see that he was finally willing to take the first step. For the first time in a long time, I believed that he could change, that we could rebuild our relationship. It wasn't going to happen overnight. It wouldn't be easy. But this was the beginning of a new chapter for both of us, a chapter where Jack could stop hiding from his past and start living in the truth. My curiosity about Camille grew with each passing day. What had truly driven her to leave Jack at the altar? Was she really just running away from her own feelings? Or was there something deeper, something I hadn't seen before? As a mother, I understood Jack's pain, but Camille was still a mystery to me. She had been the one who seemingly rejected everything about him, who had demanded that he hide his past. But in the silence of her absence, I began to question whether she too had been a victim of the same forces that had shaped Jack. One afternoon, I received an unexpected call from Camille. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant, as she asked if we could meet. I was hesitant at first. After all, she was the one who had rejected my son. But something in her tone told me this wasn't just another attempt at making amends for the mess she had caused. She sounded vulnerable, like someone who had been carrying a heavy burden for far too long. We met at a quiet cafe, the kind of place where secrets could be shared in whispers, away from prying eyes. Camille arrived, her posture stiff, as if bracing herself for something. She was still beautiful, but there was a sadness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She sat down across from me, her fingers nervously twisting the napkin in front of her. "I didn't know who else to talk to," Camille began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've made so many mistakes, and I don't know how to fix any of them." She paused, looking at me as though weighing her next words. "I owe you an explanation. I owe Jack an explanation." I listened, not interrupting, sensing that she had been carrying this weight for far longer than I realized. "I thought I could escape," she continued, her eyes welling up with tears. "I thought that if I just pretended to be someone I wasn't, if I could just fit into this world that everyone expected of me, Jack's world, the high society world, I would finally feel like I mattered. But the truth is, I've always felt like an outsider. I've always felt like I was pretending." Her words hit me harder than I expected. In that moment, I saw Camille not as the woman who had tried to take my son away, but as a woman who had been fighting her own internal battle, one that she had never been able to win. "I come from nothing," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I grew up in a small town, in a family that struggled to make ends meet, and when I met Jack, I thought maybe, just maybe, this was my chance to escape all of that. But it wasn't real. I wasn't real. I was just pretending to be someone I'm not, someone who could fit into a world that didn't want me." The weight of her confession settled heavily between us. I could hear the pain in her voice, the guilt that she had carried with her for so long. Camille wasn't the villain I had painted her to be. She wasn't the woman who had come into my son's life and ripped him away from me. She was just a young woman, lost in the world of societal expectations, trying to survive in a world that didn't understand her. "I know I hurt Jack," Camille said, her eyes finally meeting mine. "I never wanted to hurt him. I thought I could handle everything, but I couldn't. The pressure was too much, and when I saw him getting so caught up in all of it, I realized that I wasn't the only one who was suffocating. We were both trapped in this world of appearances, and I couldn't keep pretending anymore." I listened to her, my heart softening with each word. I had been so quick to judge her, to see her as the one who had caused my son so much pain. But now I realized that Camille and Jack had been two sides of the same coin. Both were trying to escape something. Jack, his humble origins. Camille, her past and the life she had left behind. They had both hidden behind a facade, each one believing that if they could just fit in, if they could just live up to the expectations, they would find happiness. "You're not the only one who's been hiding, Camille," I said quietly. "Jack has been hiding too. Hiding from who he is, from where he came from. He's been so focused on proving himself to the world that he forgot what really matters. But the truth is, none of that matters. We are who we are, no matter where we come from. And I think Jack is starting to realize that." Camille nodded, wiping away the tears that had fallen from her eyes. "I don't know what will happen with Jack and me," she said softly. "But I know that I can't keep running from myself anymore. I can't keep pretending. I need to find out who I really am, outside of everything I've been pretending to be." I sat in silence for a moment, reflecting on everything Camille had shared. I had seen her as an enemy, someone who had torn apart my family, but now I saw her differently. She was a woman just as lost as Jack, someone who had been caught in the web of expectations, trying to fit into a world that didn't care about her true self. I realized that, in a way, she was just like him, someone who had been pressured to become someone they weren't, someone who had been forced to hide their roots, their true identity, in order to survive. "I don't know where this will go, Camille," I said finally, "but I think you and Jack have both been through enough. It's time to stop running. It's time to face the truth." She nodded, a small smile breaking through her sadness. "Thank you, Amelia, for listening. I don't know if I deserve your understanding, but I'm grateful for it." As I left the cafe that afternoon, I couldn't help but feel a sense of resolution. Camille wasn't the enemy. She was another victim of a world that demanded perfection, a world that forced both her and Jack to hide who they truly were. And maybe, just maybe, they both had a chance at healing, together, apart, or however it needed to be. The days after my conversation with Camille felt strangely different. I wasn't sure if it was the realization of her vulnerability or the shift in my own perspective, but something had changed in me. I could see the cracks in the facade of both Camille and Jack more clearly now, and I knew it was time for the truth to come to light. It had been too long, too many lies, and now it was time to expose them, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but the raw truth. I had always believed that the truth would find its way to the surface eventually, but now I understood something deeper. It was up to me to guide it there. Jack had spent so many years hiding, so many years running from who he was, from where he came from. Camille had been living a lie as well, trapped by expectations and the pressure to conform. But if they were going to heal, they needed to confront their pasts, their fears, and their own truths, and I was going to make sure they did. Jack had been quiet lately, withdrawn, but I could see the internal battle raging within him. He knew he had to confront the truth, but he was still afraid of rejection, afraid of what it would mean for his life, for his future with Camille, for everything he had worked so hard to build. I could see the struggle in his eyes, the way he was torn between wanting to come clean and being terrified of the consequences. He had built a life of lies, and now those lies were suffocating him. I had my own role to play in this. I couldn't force Jack to face the truth, but I could guide him. I could manipulate the situations in a way that would push him toward the inevitable confrontation. The truth was, like a force of nature, it couldn't be stopped. And if I could use my experience, my understanding of how people think and act, I could make sure that Jack would have no choice but to confront it. One afternoon, I invited both Jack and Camille to my house. I knew it wasn't going to be easy, but I could feel that this was the moment. The truth had to be laid bare, and they had to face it together. When they arrived, I could see the tension between them. Neither one of them knew what to expect, but both of them were aware that something had to change. The air was thick with unspoken words, with unresolved emotions. "I've asked you both here because it's time to stop hiding," I began, my voice calm but firm. "You've both spent so much time running from the truth, from yourselves, and from each other. It's time to stop pretending. The truth is the only thing that can set you free." Jack looked at me, his face a mask of confusion and fear. "Mom, what do you mean?" His voice was shaky, and I could see the discomfort in his eyes. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I looked at Camille, who was sitting across from Jack, her hands nervously twisting in her lap. I could see the shame in her eyes, the same shame I had seen in Jack's for so long. She wasn't ready, but she needed to be. "Camille, tell Jack what you told me," I said gently, my tone soft but insistent. "Tell him about the life you've been hiding from, about the pressures you've faced, about the woman you've been pretending to be." Camille hesitated, her eyes flickering between Jack and me. The words were stuck in her throat, but I knew she had to say them. She had to speak her truth, just as Jack had to speak his. Finally, she took a deep breath. Her voice trembling as she spoke. "I've been living a lie," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not who I've been pretending to be. I come from a humble background, just like you, Jack. I've been hiding it my whole life, pretending to fit into a world that isn't mine. I thought if I could just play the part, if I could just be perfect, I would finally belong. But it's been killing me, trying to be someone I'm not. I don't want to lie anymore." I could see the weight of her words settling on Jack. His face was pale, his mouth slightly open as if trying to process what she had just said. He had always believed that Camille was perfect, that she was everything he wasn't, and now, here she was, admitting that she had been hiding too. Jack turned to Camille, his voice low and uncertain. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" He was trembling, his hands clenched into fists. "Why didn't you trust me with the truth?" Camille's eyes filled with tears as she reached out to him. "I was afraid, Jack. I thought, if you knew the truth, you wouldn't want me. I thought I wasn't good enough for you. I didn't think I could ever measure up to the life you wanted, the life I thought you wanted. I was so afraid of losing you." The tension in the room was unbearable. It was as if all the years of pretending, all the years of hiding, were coming to a head in this one moment. Jack looked at Camille, his face softening. I could see the internal struggle in him, the desire to forgive, the need to understand. "I've been so stupid," Jack said, his voice breaking. "I thought if I could just be someone else, if I could just fit in, I'd be enough. But I wasn't enough for you, Camille. I wasn't even enough for myself." Camille reached out to him, taking his hand in hers. "Jack, I don't want you to be anyone else. I want you to be you, the real you, and I want to be real with you too. I can't keep hiding anymore." The air in the room shifted. The truth was finally out, and it was raw and painful, but it was freeing. Jack and Camille were no longer hiding from each other. They were no longer hiding from themselves. And for the first time in a long time, I saw something in my son's eyes that I hadn't seen in years. Hope. It wasn't going to be easy, and there would be more challenges ahead, but they were taking the first step toward healing, toward living their lives without the masks. "You can't keep running from who you are," I said softly. "And neither can you, Camille. The truth will always find a way to the surface. It's time to stop hiding." Jack nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I'm ready," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm ready to stop running." Camille squeezed his hand. "Me too." And for the first time, I felt a sense of peace settle in. The truth was out, and it had set us all free. The air between Jack and me had been heavy for so long. Every word we exchanged, every glance, felt like it was filled with unspoken truths and unresolved pain. But today, there would be no more avoidance. Today, I would confront him. The time for silence was over. Jack sat across from me, his hands trembling, his eyes not quite meeting mine. I could see the fear in his expression, the same fear that had always kept him from being honest with me. For so long, I had let him hide behind excuses and lies, but no more. It was time for him to face the consequences of his actions. "Jack," I began, my voice steady but filled with a quiet intensity. "You've spent so many years living in lies, hiding from the truth. You've convinced yourself that you could run from your past, from who you really are, but you can't. The truth doesn't go away, Jack. It catches up to you." He winced at the words, his eyes now locked onto mine. I saw the pain in his gaze, but I wasn't going to back down. He needed to hear this. "You've hurt me, Jack," I continued, my voice calm but firm. "You rejected me. You chose to believe that your worth was tied to something else, something superficial. You let your fear of being rejected keep you from loving the people who truly cared about you." He shifted in his seat, his face flushed with shame. "I never meant to hurt you, Mom," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know you didn't, Jack," I replied softly. "But that doesn't change the fact that you did. You kept your distance from me, from the truth, and from everything that mattered. And now, you have to face it. You have to own up to the person you've been, to the lies you've told, to the way you've hurt the people who loved you. Tears welled up in his eyes as the weight of my words hit him. He didn't say anything at first, just sat there struggling to find the words. And then, slowly, almost as if it was the hardest thing he had ever done, he spoke. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I know I've been a coward. I've been hiding and I've hurt you. I've hurt myself. I don't know how to fix it all, but I want to start. I want to be the person you always believed I could be." The sincerity in his words was raw, and for the first time in so long, I saw a glimpse of the son I once knew. The man who had been too afraid to be himself, too afraid of rejection, was finally confronting his truth. And in that moment, I felt the weight of the years of hurt start to lift. The forgiveness didn't come instantly, but it was beginning to flow, slow and steady, like a stream cutting through rock. We still had a long road ahead, but for the first time, I knew we could walk it together. The road to healing had been long and painful, but in the quiet aftermath of Jack's apology, I found something I hadn't expected: peace. For years, I had carried the weight of regret, shame, and resentment. I had allowed the mistakes of others to define me, to overshadow the woman I truly was. But now, with the truth laid bare and the burden of our past finally lifted, I could breathe again. Jack and I had finally started to rebuild our relationship piece by piece. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. We were both learning to live without the walls we had built around ourselves. I had forgiven him, and in doing so, I had also forgiven myself. I had spent so much of my life trying to be everything to everyone, wife, mother, caretaker, that I had lost sight of who I was, but no more. With each passing day, I began to rediscover the woman I had forgotten, the woman who had dreams, who had a voice, who had a life of her own before the roles of wife and mother consumed her. I started to take time for myself again, doing the things I had once loved, painting, reading, and even traveling. There was a world out there I had ignored for far too long, and I was determined to explore it. I took a trip to the coast one weekend, something I had always dreamed of doing but never made time for. As I stood on the beach, the wind in my hair and the sound of the waves crashing against the shore, I felt a sense of freedom wash over me. It was as if all the years of carrying others' burdens, of living for everyone but myself, had melted away. For the first time in years, I felt like I was truly living, not for anyone else, but for me. I also started a new project, one I had been too afraid to pursue for years. I wrote a book. It wasn't a grand bestseller, nor was it even a work of great literary accomplishment, but it was mine. It was my story, my voice. Writing had always been a passion of mine, but it was something I had pushed aside for too long. Now I was allowing myself to be vulnerable, to share my thoughts and experiences with the world, and it felt liberating. New friendships began to blossom too. I met people who saw me for who I truly was, not as a wife or a mother, but as Amelia. I no longer felt like I had to hide behind a role or a label. I was enough just as I was. I had finally come to terms with my past, with all the mistakes and missteps I had made, and accepted that they didn't define me. I was more than my history. I was more than my past. The weight of the world no longer felt so heavy on my shoulders. The shame, the guilt, the anger, it was all gone, replaced by a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. I was free, free to be the woman I had always wanted to be, free to live my life on my terms. And as I looked back at everything I had been through, I realized that the pain, the struggles, the heartache, they had all led me here. They had led me to this moment of freedom, of self-acceptance. I had learned to live authentically, to embrace my flaws and my past, and in doing so, I had found the strength to move forward. I was no longer the woman I used to be. I was Amelia, the woman who had finally found her voice, her purpose, and her peace. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.